Welcome to another edition of Focus on Alternatives, brought to you by ADISA, the Alternative and Direct Investment Securities Association. For more content like this, please visit adisa.org and check out the resource library. My name is Greg Mausz. I'll be your host today. I'm joined by John Grady, the co-chair of the Legislative and Regulatory Committee here at ADISA and also a fellow board member. John, thank you for joining me here today.
Great. I'm glad to be here, Greg. Thanks.
Want to talk about the latest going on in L&R. I guess let's start with the bad news. What are kind of some of the top concerns that ADISA is worried about right now?
I think that when it comes to things we really are focused our energies on, I would say first and foremost, it's the fact that the Department of Labor really doesn't like the broker-dealer business model. It's wrapped up in its fiduciary rule proposal, and the courts may have the last say on it. But underneath it is a hostility to the broker-dealer business model that I think we, as an association with members who are broker-dealers, need to pay a lot of attention to and try and provide as best we can a counter-narrative to what's coming out of the department.
Okay, so that's a big deal.
It is a big deal. Their rulemaking is significant for the broker-dealer part of our industry, and thankfully the courts have been taking a close look, and we're going to talk more about that. As to how the courts are getting more and more involved in regulatory initiatives. But at this point, it's been stayed, but it's also been appealed. So we have to keep watching.
Okay. How are states operating these days with alternative investments? Any concerns there?
So what we are keeping an eye on is not yet in the public eye, but what we hear is NASA, which is the organization that really is the collective arm, the securities arm of the states across the country. NASA's non-traded REIT guidelines are rumored for a reappearance in terms of a new set of revised guidelines. What we're paying attention to is twofold. One, a potential for a concentration policy to show up. It would be uniform across all the states. Absolute limits on the ability of an investor to own illiquid programs. And as drafted the first time around went far beyond that, which was very concerning. But also, there are suggestions anyway that we're hearing that NASA is going to propose a significant increase in wealth or income requirements to just be an accredited investor. It's not their decision, but they're definitely putting their thumb on the scale.
Well, we will see how that works out. One of the trends that is happening here is there's more of a move to the RIA model. The DOL is addressing that, but you're seeing more and more people go fee-based financial planning. On the RIA front, and you're actually seeing that here at ADISA. We're having more RIAs attend the meeting, learning about alts, learning about best practices on how to apply them, which ones to start with, and then, further advanced strategies. But there's also some rules going on with RIAs. Can you touch on those?
Yeah, the SEC has been very active in rules under the Advisors Act, which of course apply to investment advisors. In particular, we've seen rules that related to the so-called private fund advisors. Again, a court enjoined the implementation of that rule, but the SEC has also proposed rules in the area of safeguarding of assets, in the area of the use of artificial intelligence or AI, and finally, outsourcing is another rule proposal. All of those are in the period between proposal and implementation. But when you add that to the efforts by FinCEN, which is the sort of the financial network that looks at things through a national security lens to impose AML obligations directly on advisors and the funds that they run, that's to us shows an increased emphasis on the regulators' part on this segment of the industry and the RIAs in particular. That's a lot
to digest. So I'm glad they're here. I'm glad they're learning. I'm glad that you're talking about it. Those are some of the top concerns. Anything we're happy about and we're positive on?
Well, it's interesting. It's almost the flip side of that same coin. And there was a recent SEC rulemaking that went down to defeat when a court looked hard at the source of the SEC's claim to regulate the conduct. I'm talking about the private fund advisor rule. But it was thrown out not because the court didn't like the rule. It was thrown out because the court didn't believe ultimately that the SEC had the power to implement or adopt the rule that regulated funds that private advisors are managing. That's interesting because that and a Supreme Court case that came on afterward called Loper-Bright is really pushing regulatory policy back into the courts. There had been, going all the way back into the 70s, a willingness of the courts to defer to agencies when it came to their expertise and their ability to adopt rules that would apply to the industry and affect, of course, our members, but not just our industry, but across industries. And what the Loper-Bright decision said was that really the courts shouldn't be paying deference to agencies necessarily on ambiguous statutory language. Rather, if it's ambiguous, the agency really enjoys no deference when it tries to fill the ambiguity with a rule of its own construction. That's a huge change. The reason why we say we're positive about it is that it means that rulemaking will now have more of an enforcement mechanism based on, did the agency really have the right to operate in that space?
Okay.
It's one of the things that is, in a sense, a judicial filter or screen on some of the rulemaking. And part of this, of course, has been against the backdrop of no congressional action. So the agencies have been the way that administrations get policy done. Now here's going to be a check on the way that the agencies are making policy on behalf of their administrations.
Those are some interesting dynamics. So let's also throw in politics. We're in an election cycle. How is the elected officials going to affect the alternative industry and some of these things we're talking about?
So I think it's fair to say through the last 3 administrations that you saw a great deal of policymaking occur in the agencies when the presidents and their administrations were unable to get a lot done in Congress. And that's as true for the Obama administration as it was for the Trump administration and the Biden administration. So the agencies became the place where the agenda could get accomplished, sometimes in close partisan votes inside the agencies themselves. So irrespective of the outcome of the coming election, the fact that agencies are really not going to have the same leeway to sort of legislate, if you will, their agencies, they don't legislate, but to create regulations with almost the effect of legislation without pushback, that's gone. I think the court's review and oversight of that process will mean that the outcome of the election will be less of a carte blanche for the agencies to implement their agendas and maybe force the administration, whichever candidate comes out ahead in the end, to more work with Congress than to just drive their agenda through the agencies.
I like the checks and balances. I like the collaboration.
We do too.
John, thanks for coming on in and sharing those insights with us. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And thank you for watching another edition of Focus on Alternatives. Again, for more content like this, please visit adisa.org. Thank you.